Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
It's Throwback Thursday, and this week we look at Die Hard. This is a quintessential movie within the action genre that even redefined the genre itself with the everyman, wrong place at the wrong time action hero, a trope that has been used time and time and time and time again. But as we are deep into December, I thought that this would be a good time to review this film and ask the question, is this a Christmas film? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but here are some arguments for and against. But firstly, and most importantly, it is set at Christmas Eve to be exact. And what makes this an even more significant time for the terrorists, or the highly financed, highly equipped, ruthless burglars, they time this robbery with a Christmas Eve party. At this time, the building is mostly empty, with the majority of people all in one place, making it easier to round up hostages. However, the time of year is kind of insignificant to the overall plot, because the screenwriters Jeb Stewart and Steven D'Souza could have written this to be at any time of year, and come up with many different scenarios resulting in having hostages in the building. Although the book, Nothing Lasts Forever, which this movie is based upon, is also set on Christmas Eve. Also, if it hadn't been set on Christmas Eve and was just a normal Wednesday night in the middle of March, would McClane have even been there? He is there to see his wife and kids for Christmas after all, and yeah, I'm splitting hairs with that argument. 20th Century Fox have stated that this is the greatest Christmas movie ever told in their 30th anniversary trailer for the film, but this is something that Bruce Willis disagrees with.
Die Hard is not a Christmas movie.
I mean, I like to think of it as a Christmas film because of its setting, and it's a film that my wife and I watch every Christmas, along with its sequel, Die Hard 2, and Lethal Weapon, which is also set at Christmas. Although the film was released in July 1988 as a summer action blockbuster, so there is that argument, I guess. But what do you think? Is it a Christmas movie? Does it even really matter? As I mentioned earlier, this film did birth a whole subgenre of action films, such as Under Siege, Die Hard on a Boat, Speed, Die Hard on a Bus, Air Force One, Die Hard on a Plane, Cliffhanger, Die Hard on a Mountain, and The Rock, Die Hard on Alcatraz Island. I could go on, there are loads more. But the funny thing about this film is that it was actually pitched as Rambo in an office building. That's pretty ironic, really. All of the films that I've just mentioned, they're all really good, but they would not have existed without Die Hard. As I also mentioned before, Die Hard was adapted from the 1979 novel Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorp, a sequel to his 1966 novel The Detective. The Detective was made into the 1968 film of the same name, starring Frank Sinatra as Joe Leland, a New York City police detective. One initial idea was to have Frank Sinatra reprise his role and follow the book much more closely, with the now retired and much older Joe Leland visiting his daughter, Stephanie Leland Gennaro, at the 40-story office headquarters of the Claxon Oil Corporation in Los Angeles on Christmas Eve. There are many similarities between the book and the finished film, such as with the main plot outline and other aspects such as the villains being headed by a man called Gruber, although in the book he's called Anton Little Tony the Red Gruber, with Hans being Carl's brother. Barefoot, Leyland slips away and manages to remain undetected in a gigantic office complex. Armed only with his Browning pistol and in communication with LA Police Sergeant Al Powell and his belligerent supervisor, Dwayne Robinson, Leyland fights off the terrorists one by one in an attempt to save the 74 hostages, his daughter and his grandchildren. The characters of Harry Ellis,
Hans, Bobby, I'm your white knight,
Al Powell, and Dwayne Robinson are much the same in the novel as they are in the finished film, with one big difference other than Leland and his daughter is at the end of the novel, Gruber falls from the window after being shot by Leland and grabs Gennaro's watch, but here he pulls her out to her death with him. That's a pretty dark and bleak ending, wouldn't you say? At the time Die Hard was released, Sinatra was 72 years old. Although Leland was much older in Nothing Lasts Forever than he was in The Detective, producers felt that having a 72-year-old running around an office complex taking out bad guys probably wasn't really what audiences wanted to see. And I think they're right. Imagine if they made something like that today. I don't think it'll go down too well. They opted to rewrite the character as a younger man and rename him John McClane. McClane is a flawed character. He is a character who doesn't really like himself too much, but is doing the best in a bad situation. This is actually a description that Bruce Willis and director John McTiernan came up with whilst further fleshing out the character during production. Willis was mostly known for his more comedic roles, most notably on the series Moonlighting. When the decision was made to change the character from the older Joe Leland to a younger character, producers wanted more established larger-than-life action heroes such as Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. However, it was later agreed that McClane needed to be more of an everyman who was out of his depth. An interesting fact is that Clint Eastwood held the rights to the novel and was planning to star in it around the early 80s. Recently, we uploaded an episode where Sean and I discussed Mary Sue and Gary Stu characters, and we had a lot of comments to that video, so a huge thanks, it's always really appreciated. In that video, we briefly mentioned John McClane as a character who is not a Gary Stu. When we first meet him, he's a bit down on himself, he's having major issues with his wife Holly, who now goes by her maiden name Gennaro, which really doesn't please McClane at all. This is due to the fact that they both live on opposite sides of the country. Both are stubborn and career driven. Neither wants to sacrifice their career for the other, but McClane does do that in the sequel and then reverts back to New York in the excellent second sequel, Die Hard with a Vengeance. Because that lad can't make his mind up. He's a bit grumpy, he's a bit prickly, and maybe a bit jet lagged. He doesn't like flying as indicated at the start of this film. The situation between John and Holly forms part of John's arc. At the start of the film, he pretty much admits to not having much faith in Holly and her career, believing that she'll just return home to New York when it all goes wrong for her. But it isn't until John feels that he's losing control of the situation and comes to terms with the realisation that he might die and admits that he was wrong, wishing he'd supported her from the start. This is where John pretty much completes his arc when coming to terms with the situation. His ego has clouded his judgment, so to speak. People with big egos don't expect to be challenged, but Holly has done just that, and it's taken a life or death experience for John to realise this. He now feels that he may not get the chance to take responsibility for the aspects in his life that he can change, and in his mind, he stands to lose everything. There's obviously a bit of regret there, as well as some character growth. Although he does triumph in the end, he does have to do it the hard way, the die-hard way. McClane has depth, and Willis is excellently cast as he isn't your typical muscle-bound action hero like Messrs Stallone and Schwarzenegger, but a believable everyman. His wisecracks also give the character a light-hearted tone at times, which is needed to break up some of the more serious, darker moments. You can't talk about Die Hard without talking about its main villain, played by the charismatic and menacingly brilliant Alan Rickman. This guy knew how to play a villain, and he certainly wasn't your generic cut and paste villain that you see in so many of these types of films. Rickman nearly turned down the part as he'd only arrived in Hollywood a few days prior to being offered the role and didn't want his first Hollywood movie to be a villain and thus becoming typecast. His performance is amazing and it does go down as one of the greatest villains in movie history, and it is fair to say he wasn't typecast. Alan Rickman steals every single scene that he's in, and he's really missed in the film industry. I still think this, and As the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, are my two favourite Rickman performances just because of how charismatic he is.
Axe and call off Christmas.
In the scene where Gruber and McClane first meet and Gruber pretends to be one of the hostages, this wasn't actually rehearsed beforehand to allow for the two actors to play off one another in a more natural fashion. This is just one example of how good the performances are in this film and how great the direction was from John McTiernan. Die Hard is a film that holds up today and is one of the greatest action movies ever made. It certainly is a must for fans of the action genre. It did also spawn 4 sequels, which are a bit of a mixed bag overall. The second film, aptly named Die Harder, isn't as good as the first, as it takes the same premise and changes it to a bigger setting in an airport, but it's still a fun film. The third film, however, Die Hard with a Vengeance, is an excellent sequel, and is possibly almost as good as the first. Again directed by John McTiernan, it doesn't just rehash the original plot beat for beat, but it takes a slightly different and more grander direction, using the original premise as a springboard rather than a rehash. Die Hard 4 or Die Hard 4.0 or whatever you want to call it just doesn't feel like a Die Hard film, so it just feels like a really watered down action film. The premise may have worked better if it wasn't a Die Hard film. And Die Hard 5, A Good Day to Die Hard, and it did die hard. It's just a terrible film. I'm more annoyed that this rubbish film steals a title from a Worf quote.
Today is a good day to die.
Which actually reminds me, Star Trek also did a Die Hard-esque episode. Next Generation's Season 6 Episode 18 entitled Starship Mine, when Picard goes all John McClane on a bunch of space bandits who are trying to steal dilithium from the warp core. It's DieHard on the Enterprise, and it's a great episode. In conclusion, DieHard is an essential for any movie fan, and it's a film that will continue to be enjoyed by generations to come, whether you think it's a Christmas film or not. I've been Colin from the Critical Cinema Club, and I thank you very, very much for watching this episode of Throwback Thursday, and I wish you
Happy trails, Hans.
until next time, take care.
Oh my god, the quarterback is toast!
You guys give up, or you're thirsty for more? Down here, you big horse's ass!